Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Welcome to Spilling the Tea on HR Tech, where we focus on the hottest HR tech news everyone needs to know to be in the know. We break down the news of the week and help you make sense of what it means for our industry and how it can impact your organization. I'm your host, Stacey Harris, Chief Research Officer and Managing Partner for Sapient Insights Group, a research and advisory firm. And joining me today and a co-host is Cliff Stevenson, who is our Director of Research here at Sapient Insights Group. And Cliff, welcome to the show. You had your inaugural show a couple of weeks ago after the first of the year, and now you're back again.
And it's wonderful to be back. And we do have news this time beyond that. It's my first show, which was big news last time.
Yes.
I've been hired in, and as 2023 has begun, we do have some news, and I'm excited to discuss with you.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear. I mean, it's not been a busy, heavy news season, which is kind of nice because, jumping right into the chaos, sometimes I feel like we still have things didn't slow down as much as they normally did, in past seasons around December. I feel like someone said, it was so hysterical. It was like, they said, it's like trying to ride a bike while you're being duct taped to it. I said, okay. That was a new one. I hadn't heard that one before. I heard riding a bike while you're building it, but not the duct tape to it. So I was like, that's a great one. So yeah, I think we were all feeling a little bit like there's just so much going on, but I know we've had a pretty busy couple of weeks. We launched the big annual HR system survey paper. So if anybody hasn't seen that yet, it's available and downloadable on our website. That happened right before the first of the year. We did several client presentations over the last couple of weeks. We've started a big SMB paper over the last couple of weeks. We've started our survey question analysis and review. And then we just did our HR System Survey Distributor exclusive presentation on the transformation of the HR technologist and the HR technology buyer this week. So it's been a busy week, lots of stuff going on. But I asked you to take a look at what you saw happening externally, and you found a couple of interesting topics, didn't you, Cliff?
I did. And I do want to circle back on that SMB research, and we can talk about that a little later from what we've seen internally. But yeah, as you mentioned, it hasn't been overwhelming, no mergers yet, no giant acquisitions.
No major announcements of people leaving. I'm sure there's something out there we're missing, but yeah, nothing that shook the ground like the co-CEO announcement at Workday, right? Like right before the holiday.
Right. Yeah. Nothing that we saw so much in the last couple of years of consolidation in the market and mergers and acquisitions. So I wouldn't be surprised to see that continue as long as there are still some companies sort of that haven't already consolidated. Yeah. I know that the big joke that we had discussed is there anyone left to merge with?
This is what I'm going to show my age, Cliff, because I've been through the cycle enough to know that there's always smaller fish in the bigger fish pond, and they just keep getting gobbled up. So I think the short answer is yes, there's always someone that you can acquire.
Well, actually, that's a good segue, because one of the bits of news that I did see come across the desk was some startups. One in particular caught my eye, HR tech startup called Confirm, as in to confirm. Well, I was about to say confirm your prejudices, but that sounds sort of negative. Confirm your hunches. There we go. I don't know if that's exactly how they want to take it, but they are sort of specializing. They're going to be looking at doing a completely automated and data-driven approach to calibration of performance reviews. If for anyone listening, if you have never had to go through the process of doing this is generally something you see at larger companies where all of the managerial reviews are given to the employees, for those that still kind of do those big annual ones, and they're still out there, to make sure that there is a sort of company-wide agreement on those reviews, since they're tied to bonuses and promotions and other things. So what Confirm aims to do is to take all of that data and automatically look at managerial rating averages to say this is someone who usually rates someone pretty high. So therefore, compared to this other rating, we can sort of even it all out, or we can tie it into performance data or the like. I want to get your thoughts on this, Stacey, because as someone who works with data all the time, I'm always a little hesitant to ascribe any sort of magical powers of removing bias purely through the technology, right? It's only as good as the data that's fed into it. And I love hearing, that we're taking a more objective approach. That's always something to add to, or, something we want to see more of. But at the same time, is there ever really a truly objective approach? Where is this data coming from, et cetera? I wonder what your thoughts are on this sort of subject.
Yeah, it's a great call. So I'm just laughing because I remember when I was actually inside of as a practitioner, right, doing those calibration meetings. I was part of them. You do it with the managers, you do it with HR. And we used to, in the HR group, we would get together and we go, oh, it's our reality check moment to talk about how, let me see if I can come up with a word that's a little more politically correct than the words we would use at that point in time. But it was a little bit for managers who did not realize how unaware they were. Mm-hmm. About how they were rating their employees. Yeah. And it is kind of, it's a little bit of a fraught issue, right? Because when you're calibrating, then you are changing somebody's commentary and rating. It's kind of the same thing we do with our research a little bit, right? We've got to go look at everything and we don't generally calibrate, but we do have to make sure that there's not these crazy swings with, half the group hates or has a lot of low user experience vendor stats, and then another group has a really high user vendor stats. There's no middle ground, and we don't know why there's no middle ground, right? Like you've got to at least understand the context if you're going to sort of keep the crazy numbers that come in sometimes on some of these performance reviews. So yes, I'm on probably more in line with where you're at, that can an artificial intelligence understand the business context and the context around the human side of it that needs to go into these calibrations? And, there's a piece of me that says, I don't know that a computer ever can. Now, there's another side of the equation that I know, everybody's talking about, which is, well, every human being has bias. And so our context setting is actually adding bias into a system that already has bias in it. So now you got bias on top of bias into things, right? So if you let the technology calibrate, do you remove the bias? I don't know. It's a really, my thing on whenever you're doing artificial intelligence side of companies is always do control groups. See what the difference is between, and it's really hard to do because you're sort of testing on people to some extent and inside your business. But I'm always like, if you're a big company and you're putting in place any kind of artificial intelligence, you should have the wherewithal to be doing constant parallel testing to make sure that you understand what comes out if it's no artificial intelligence involvement versus what comes out if there's artificial intelligence involvement. And I think that'll get us to a better place if we do a lot more of that kind of testing, would be my sense of it. But I do think it's a challenging and a tricky question. But I'm also a believer that we don't want to put our heads in the sand and say, okay, yes, it's tricky, so let's not deal with it. It is the future. We just got to figure out how to do it ethically and responsibly, right?
Yeah, and I think it speaks to some other trends, and we'll be talking about trends in a few of these other bits of news to go forward, towards really trying to get at remote workers or fully digital workers where there's a lot of different data points coming in. So you would hope to be able to look at that and give a more fair and equitable view of it. I know they do some network analysis and some other ways of trying to get at who is most influential in an organization. But, the other big part of it is, this speaks to what people are looking for, hopefully, right? Whenever we're seeing these startups coming up, there's still a need for this, as much as we've talked about moving forward in the whole performance review space, right? Doing more daily check-ins and having more of a view of that is a little more difficult with more remote workers.
Yeah, we just did a briefing today I did with BetterWorks, which I haven't talked to them in probably about a year and a half. And so it was good to get an update on where they were at. And it was this exact conversation, right, that we were having around the fact that so much of what we're seeing new products come out around is around the ratings, the compliance conversations, right? But a lot of systems, they're not talking about the before you do the rating, all the pre-check-ins that you just talked about, all the connection to the business work, where I track that work at, is it connected to a business productivity tool, right? That's not really being talked about in what you just talked about in this confirm, right? Like they're just saying, like, once you get your rating. What do you do with it?
Mhm.
I think there's a lot of conversation to be had about the pre-rating conversation, right?
Yeah. And how the data is collected and the truth and cleanliness of that data.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
yeah. So kind of keeping with that trend of having trends, this comes from our good friends over at UKG. They had a newsletter go out on the 2023 HR megatrends. And, you can find all of these, sort of keyword searching from what I said, but I'm just going to kind of hit the three sort of titles of these. Number one, using their words, employees around the world are experiencing emotional undercurrent of chronic anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, that COVID-19 was a wake-up call for business to become more agile. And number three, Gen Xers are leading their companies differently than baby boomers. The only thing I will add as a sort of subscript to that is that one of the data points that they use in that second one, kind of talking about organizations feeling a little more in danger, was a McKinsey study from 2023, end of 2022, that said that the average lifespan of S&P 500 companies in 1958, it was 61 years. In 2026, according to their study, it's expected to be 14 years.
Oh, wow.
So companies are, drastically.
I knew it was shortened, but I didn't think it was shortened.
Yeah. So organizations are seeing that, they're under much more, threat than they were before, and they need to be able to adapt and be more agile. Obviously makes sense. So, although it was the second point, I find it interesting that, this idea of COVID-19 having these longer term effects beyond just the remote work that we've touched on.
It's interesting. One of the things we had laughed a little bit about is, generally many of the vendors will gather up all of the analysts' sort of insights and do their, here's the big trends for this year coming from the analysts. I think it's content's being generated by all the vendors too. It's good for us to maybe take a look back and add some commentary to what they're saying is going to happen, right? So I like where you're going with some of this, Liv. Yeah, UKG I think has a wealth of data that they've got both from their systems as well as from their great places to work environment. So I don't know if they've embedded any of that into their trends and analysis that they were looking at. But the McKinsey conversation I think is an interesting one in the fact that there's just a concern for me and when we look at sort of where the market is heading, that we're not making assumptions about it based off our fact that yes, Gen X's are sort of maybe leading differently, but would you not expect them to lead differently, right? Like right. That idea that maybe whether that's something wrong, and yes, there's a shortened time span for these businesses that either make it, break it, or survive. But I think a lot of that is mergers and acquisitions too. So I don't know where that comes into those timeframes, right? How many of those are, no longer there because they got acquired or gobbled up, right? So lots of, I think, trust and antitrust kind of conversations that probably need to be had in the market that we've sort of sidestepped a little bit in the name of innovation and growth over the last several years. So my assumption is that we'll probably see some of that starting to come up. So I guess I'm thinking about yes, those are things that we're going to be seeing, but maybe the conversation is better to talk about not only why we're seeing them, but also what do we do with that information, right? Like what actions should we be taking if we know that Gen X is leading differently? Why is that the case? And what does that mean differently for our workforces, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I know that, there's been a lot of ink spilled on just generational differences. As a Gen Xer myself, I love just even getting noticed that we still exist because they seem to have been sort of the forgotten generation there. But I'm also more of a believer in, looking at what your workforce needs rather than trying to make any direct actions based on, generational differences, which are, there's nothing in there, I think, that's too actionable when we talk about generations. I think it's always good to realize that things change over time, and as new workers come in, they have different expectations, whether that be more of a focus on mental health, more of a focus on, work-life balance and that type of thing, rather than trying to ascribe it to some sort of, thing that's just caught within a 15 or 20 year span.
Yeah, exactly. I just laugh at your Gen Xers or that were even remembered. We were talking about, when I did my big keynote at HR Tech about what music I should go on stage to. And we ended up, I think, with, some pop music that was very, very good. But I was like, do you think they'd let me go to Alanis Morissette? And, isn't it ironic? Because that's how I often feel, right? Like I just get to where I need to be and something happens that blows it up, right?
Oh.
And, I do think, again, we have to, it isn't about the generation, but each of us get to a certain age point and we're starting to look and have expectations and things tend to get kind of blown up and, in our, where we're at sometimes. And that causes a whole different look at how you have to work, right? COVID 2020, as Gen X just getting into the leadership role, we see one of the most major pandemics in the market, right? And that we've seen in over almost 100 years. And on top of that, our data shows that we lost them. The Gen Xers made the decision and oftentimes to not come back to work or go back to the positions they had. And they made major job changes. And so that, again, I don't think is a generational thing. I think it's just you get to a certain level and age and you just make different decisions about your life, right?
That's exactly it. And also, I think you really did read ahead because that is a perfect segue into what I'd seen next from Paycor. This is another one from private organization. This is HR in 2023, Insights and Predictions. And the first one, right? The first key takeaway from this, without going through all of them, is that, in their words, again, a consensus is forming that the current talent shortage may be a long-term or permanent feature of the economy. So it's exactly it. The people that are sort of leaving the workforce, if they may be coming back, but they may be coming back in a totally different way.
Yeah.
And we've sort of seen ups and downs in talent before, but it usually had to do with the sort of usual swings. People out of the workforce for external reasons, back in. But now there seems to be a little more internal driving forces and a little more freedom. And I think that this speaks to that sort of concept of self-service and self-determination that we see when we look at things like career pathing and other forms of, even in the talent acquisition space, where the tech has become much more focused on the end user and their ability to sort of select their own path. I'll give a few more of the takeaways from this particular paper, see if there's any you want to jump in and talk about some. But, again, this is, there's sort of insights and predictions. So there's nothing here set in stone, and we can kind of make our own as well. But there's this labor market today is the most competitive in decades, with, according to their statistics, 91% of businesses planning to hire in the next 12 months. Employee retention will be the number one priority of 2023. Wages will continue to rise, especially for blue collar jobs. The relationship between organizations and workers is changing in that it's becoming more employee driven, that they're able to make their own decisions rather than it being a top down sort of thing. And finally, that the pandemic exposed the strengths and weaknesses of company cultures, which really sort of seems to be a growing consensus that the pandemic fundamentally changed the way we work, just how it goes. But I think, at least as far as what we like to talk about, I think it affected the way we approach our work in terms of the technology we use and what that means for our experiences and how we think about work and our productivity and what that means.
Yeah, no, I think you're completely right. And, it's funny. It is, I think I remember actually writing this, like when we were writing the big paper this year, and at the end of it, it was this 2020. I'm like, if I say 2020 changed our world one more time, I think I'm going to, just scream. I think I finally just said, look, we all thought we all knew it wasn't going to go back to normal. We all hoped it would. So we kept trying to act like it was going to. It didn't. Look, we can't talk about how it changed our world anymore. We just have to start doing, right? We now have to just start planning and strategizing and managing our work in this new environment and stop talking about how much it has changed. And I know that's a bit hard because sometimes we just want to wring our hands and say, we weren't prepared for this. No one told us this is how it was going to be, right? But to quote my father, oftentimes life is not fair, right? And that's frustrating because I think, we would all like to say, hey, that this should be something that we could have seen and had plans for. But I think part of what we got out of the last several years, and it is a really important component to remember, is all that data about, we could take that as an anomaly and then start to say, okay, so now I've got to start tracking new and thinking about where things at. Or we could start to realize that all of that last several years gave us answers that we probably would have never found. What happens when we don't have the talent? Like before, that was a conceptual theory. Mm-hmm. Now we know it, right? We know how much money we lose if we don't have the staff to keep a restaurant open, right? Like that's a thing restaurants now know. Previously we would be able to lay people off and then hire new people right after that who could sort of fill big positions that we needed. And that's not the case. So now we have to really think, what does it take to bring on brand new employees, and how much does it really cost? And how much time does it really cost if they don't have the skill sets that we expect them or need them to have, right? I think those are things that if we weren't tracking and if we weren't paying attention the last couple of years, we probably don't know how much data we really have available, right? Yeah. And I think it's powerful data because it's information that we need to plan for tomorrow. The other thing I want to call out with the Paycor fact on this is that they have traditionally been a solution that has been predominantly focused on the SMB market. They've been moving up to mid-market and been very focused on expanding their capabilities in the mid-market space. And our data definitely shows that they're making headway in that approach that they're taking. But, looking at it through the lens of SMB and mid-market, a lot of the stuff they're talking about, I think, really has an impact in maybe a different way than it does at an enterprise 5,000 plus employee organization, right? Rising compensation costs, the lack of ability to get talent, those kind of things kind of get managed out of sort of very large companies can kind of balance that across a large corporation, right? Where they need to adjust compensation, they need to adjust talent gaps, they need to fill in areas, right? If they've got the resources, the tools that are to manage that. For a small company, not being able to get the talent you need, or maybe having to pay beyond what you currently have, the capacity to sort of do your sales model for, could mean you go out of business. And to Paycor, that's a big issue because HR technology is all about running a business. But if a business gets in trouble, what can HR technology be the tool that helps them get to the next 6 months? And I don't know, Cliff, I mean, you're doing a little bit of analysis of our data at SMB right now, but do you think that maybe changes how Paycor thinks about these predictions a little bit, versus maybe a large enterprise focused sort of solution provider?
No, that I think you've hit the nail on the head. One of the things we are seeing, at least in sort of the initial pass, is a growing appetite for small organizations to use third-party groups. And there's certainly nothing wrong with that intrinsically. But you're right. If it is being used as a sort of Band-Aid or temporary solution, then oftentimes the processes and the sort of support and structure that needs to go around it may not be in place. And so those sort of services may need to be grown out of their providers. So that may, affect how companies like Paycor think about what they're going to market with, because, their ability to give, and others of their like, to give smaller businesses the same sort of experiences and tools that were previously unavailable to them, either because they just weren't being made or they're priced out of it, is great. But now they may need to expand that into service offerings as well and use their experience to avoid the sort of pitfalls that smaller companies just don't have the sort of age to have always gone through.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think it's very, very true is that we have to remember that every vendor does have audiences and they look through the lens of that audience as they should and as they need to. Yeah.
Yeah. So, we've kind of looked a little bit in the predictions. So the final article I wanted to talk about was one on Business Insider that was HR execs, this title, in case anyone wants to search it, HR execs open up about the biggest challenges that will define 2023. And this would probably be a good time for us to think about our own, but I'll bring up some that were brought up. One was from, and I apologize if any of you are listening, and I'm mispronouncing names, but I think I've got them right. Nicola Moreau, CHRO at IBM, Closing the Skills Gap. I'm shortening here for effect or for respect for our time. Lars Schmidt from Amplify, investing in employees' career development. Pat Waiters at UKG, caring for employees in a tough economy. And Jamie Klein at Inspire, human resources, offering different types of flexibility. All will be, most important in 2023. The one that sort of stands out to me, because I think, yes, certainly career development and allowing employees to have more of a say in their own pathing, and certainly being aware of the economic pressures and giving people more financial tools is definitely, I think, something we will see more of in 2023. I would think that we have already started to see those trends, though. But the closing the skills gap that was brought up by the CHRO at IBM, that one to me is pretty interesting, because that is one I've certainly heard a lot from. Now, again, this really goes back to that thing we keep kind of bringing back, which is that data. I think there wasn't as much information understood exactly about what are our current skills at, for an organization, sort of knowing that inventory, and also what are the skills that are going to be needed, because the workplace is changing, right? And different types of skills are needed, different types of management abilities are needed. And there are nearly limitless resources out there. Sometimes the problem for people trying to buy HR technology is not trying to find an organization that does that. It's being spoiled for choice, right? And trying to pick through the marketing and, business speak and get to what is just right for their organization. And so I think, people are going to want to close that skills gap. But I think my prediction for 2023 is going to be a lot more of trying to understand what can be datafied and what sort of decisions can be made using data. You touched on it earlier, Stacey, when we were talking about performance reviews right at the beginning, which is what sort of people decisions should be made through, AI and through data, and which ones really require high human touch.
Yeah.
And I think finding that gap and really making this a major conversation rather than just something for weird data geeks like ourselves is going to come to the forefront in 2023. We've always talked about sort of ethical issues, but I think they're really going to be pushed to the forefront. That's my prediction.
I would agree. I mean, there was a great podcast, and I will, for our next conversation, I'll pull the name of it. But there is a journalist who has done a lot of research and work on the ethics of the biases that are in the artificial intelligence, particularly in the recruiting software right now, but in other areas. And what I love about it is that she's come at it from a truly journalist. She knew nothing about it and basically said, okay, well, how do I find out more information about this, right? And so she really dug in and started to test some things and to see what was working and what wasn't working and what was happening. And through her kind of blind A/B testing, right, she found that, a lot of these artificial intelligence promises weren't working as well as we had hoped they would, right? Mm-hmm. And so I do think, yes, it's going to come more to the forefront. But I also think that we've been now talking about this. I mean, I can remember some of our first conversations on this almost 5-6 years ago, right? I think it's before, you would find out that something was causing a major amount of bias or was having an impact, when Google tried to sort of implement some new AI, right? You just shut it down and you just kind of said, okay, that didn't work. Now what, right? I think the difference in 2023 and 2024 and 2025 is we're going to be a lot more open to that didn't work, what needs to be adjusted, because I think we are realizing that it's going to be here. Organizations are coming up with better ways every day to sort of look at the data and to analyze it. And we're really seeing, when it comes to marketing environments and, campaign tools and our business supply chain tools, right? Like they're all being pushed to a level that we'd never expected to sort of understand how they can leverage artificial intelligence and algorithms and data to predict where the market is going to be at in the next, year to 6 months sometimes. And so HR is not going to be immune from that. We're going to have to be part of that dialogue, and we should be part of that dialogue. And we should not be, sort of saying no just because it didn't work the first time. I think what we should be doing though is again, we should be the conversation leader, not just about ethics and data privacy, but also about how do we make sure we understand the impact, and how do we make sure that the investments we're making in these technologies are serving a business need more than serving a desire to just make things more efficient or make things more quick. Because I always use the old adage that, when time management systems first went in place in organizations loved them because they no longer had to write everything down on paper and have a manager come and figure out everybody's schedules. And, like it was all automated and it was great. But what we found, particularly in a lot of manufacturing organizations and retail organizations, is that the time that a manager might spend in understanding the shifts that an employee could work also allowed them to understand what skill sets that employee had. And so we lost some of that communication, which meant that, yes, we made it more efficient, but we lost some of the places where we would have gathered information and now had no other way to gather that information. So it's really important as we're implementing any of these new technologies that we think about not just what we're going to get out of it from an efficiency perspective or speed or decision-making, but what we also might be losing and how we can replace those things as well, right? Which is the human touch, or the place where we're gathering data intuitively, or where we're pulling information from a process step that no longer exists. Because that's really the hardest part, is when everything is automated, when we're going step by step and everything's in a technology-based environment. Skills management, we've been talking about it for years, and it is not that it hasn't been successful. We've seen some really successful implementations of skills and competency management over the years. But what has really happened is it hasn't been scalable or maintainable. And that's really been the biggest issue, is can the technology make all of the things we've learned about how to manage the skills more maintainable, more scalable, more repeatable, in a way that then can also be updated on a regular basis. And I think that's the nugget we're really trying to fix. We know how to manage the competencies. We know how to manage the skills. That's the thing we've been doing for years. What we don't understand is how to maintain that on an ongoing basis and keep it up to date.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that I don't know whose prediction it was from last year, from 2022. It might have been yours, saying that, HR was going to get back to that H part of the R, right?
Yeah.
Of, doing the thing that makes them a valuable resource, which was having that human connection, being able to understand, psychology, and do more than just increase efficiency, but help the people in their organization, of course, not only be valuable for their organization, but to be healthy and safe.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Cliff, we've kind of blown through our half hour already. All we've been talking about is just a couple of predictions.
My tea is gone cold.
Yes, I know. So any last minute comments? I know you want to talk a little bit about the SMB work that you're doing. You want to tell anybody any items on that? Because I think that's a paper that we're one of the few organizations, I think, who really do gather data on organizations under 500 employees with sort of an analyst insight, right? There's a lot of sort of open-ended websites that capture data, but not many that have an analyst sort of reviewing, analyzing, and validating all of that. What's your thoughts on getting to that SMB data and maybe pulling it out for the audience as well this year?
Yeah, that's right. I'm going to have that out. So, that'll be available for them next month. It is really looking at, as you said, there's not a lot of organizations that have this sort of data because it requires a fairly large data set. It's much easier to get data from larger organizations, but to have a large enough where it's statistically meaningful, we can see not only differences between small, medium-sized businesses. What we're looking at specifically are those under 500 employees, in case you're wondering how we define that. And also seeing what trends and what is specific to those organizations and what may be driving that, as you said, the sort of analyst perspective. And I think it's going to be pretty interesting. I'm still in this sort of data gathering stage, but already seeing some interesting things about the uses of PEOs or the increased use of technology, which we touched on earlier in the podcast, and what they are going to need, which not having the reliance on generalized resources that larger companies can have. How are they meeting the challenges that are facing all organizations across the board? Because that's one thing that doesn't discriminate, right? When if the economy's down or there's a pandemic, that doesn't just affect large businesses, it affects us all. So the ways we have to go about meeting those challenges, though, that will be interesting to see, both in how it's been done in the past and what we can recommend for the future.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and if anybody is interested in maybe talking to Cliff about the work that he's doing in the SMB report, or if you are an organization that focuses in that area and would like to share any of your insights or thoughts, please feel free to reach out to us at research@sapientinsights.com, because I think you're going to be doing a lot of interviews and conversations around it as well as we're pulling the data together. So we'd love to hear from anybody who that's their focus as well. I know we've already had a couple of consulting firms who focus in that area who've reached out and said, this is great to finally see data focused here, right? So I think a lot of people are excited about it. Just a quick reminder to our listeners as well that you can access on our website at sapientinsight.com. It's pretty easy right up front. It's two big buttons there. And one of them goes to our big annual report, which you can click and download. It is available to everyone. And it has 175 pages of the most amazing reading. Well, I won't say that. Amazing charts is probably a better way to put it, right, Cliff? About what's happening in the HR technology industry. There's a lot of data there, a lot of good reading as well, to be honest. We've got a lot of people who are interested in seeing where the market is heading. That data definitely provides that view. We also have access right there, if you don't want to read 175 pages, to our key findings deck that was delivered at the HR Tech Conference in October, which will give you the highlights from that report and is also really valuable. And both those are available right off that front link. If you're interested in getting more in-depth data or support in your HR strategy journey, just drop us a line at info@sapientinsights.com to schedule some time to chat. Also, sign up for our newsletter to get ongoing updates on the research launches, where we'll be speaking and visiting. I know there's a lot of upcoming conferences that we're looking at in the next couple of months. We'll be sharing our findings from those conferences, but if you want to meet us while we're there, that's a great place to find out where we'll be at and when you can participate in our annual survey. So we just dropped a little note this week to save the date. The survey will be launching May 9th. Please keep that in your calendar, May 9th through July 1st. If you want to distribute, so if you're a vendor or an association or a consulting firm, anybody out there who has an audience that you like to speak to and you feel would have some good insights for our research, feel free to reach out to us and let us know if you'd be interested in being a distributor. Right on our research page, you can sign up to do that. If you're interested in participating in the research, watch for the emails. They'll come in campaign tools. Some of them I try and send direct. I know it's hard to get through the focused, unfocused boxes in Microsoft Offices on your spam filters, but we try and make sure everybody gets access to the survey so you can get your own copy of the findings at the end. A big thank you to my guests today. So thanks, Cliff, for taking the time to chat with me. You're going to continue to do this. I think next week or the week after next, when we do this, it's going to be you and Tammy Smith, who is our research analyst,
so
correct? Yeah.
I believe it'll be her first appearance. So audience, be very nice. It's very exciting for her. So
yeah, we're really excited. She's going to be sharing some inside nuggets about sort of what we do in our cleaning process, how we think about our data analysis. We'll talk a little bit, I think, about what we've learned from working in one of the largest surveys that has ever been put into the vendor that we work with for our surveys. So, kind of what that looks like and some best practices around what we've learned and haven't learned. I also want to thank Brand Method Media Group, who helps us produce our podcast and run by their amazing founder, Kelly. We couldn't do this without their help. She keeps us up to date and aware of what's happening, as well as our amazing marketing team, Lisa Renko and Zoe Britton, who really make sure that we get this information out to you and have a clear communication message around where we're going. And as always, thanks to our listeners and community. We couldn't do this without you. You are what makes this all special and makes it all worth it. Our goal is to make sure that we're keeping you up to date as much as possible in a way that makes sense for you. That's it for this episode of Spilling the Tea on HR Tech. We hope it's been just the brew you needed to start the engines running this week. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe and leave a rating and review below to stay up to date with immediate breaking HR tech news and get all the behind the scenes content. You can follow me or Sapient Insights on LinkedIn, as well as follow me at Stacey Harris HR on Twitter and Instagram as well. We're really excited to be able to share all the ongoing updates. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another pot of HR tech updates and insights just for you.